Okay, hi everybody, and again I hope you all had a wonderful and liberating Chag HaPesach, Chag HaMatzot, and now of course we're already in the Sfiras Omer period, looking forward towards the next Chag, the Chag of Matan Torah, and I'm not going to talk about Sfiras Omer tonight, I'll leave that for a little later, but the Sefer Chinuch makes the very clear point that the purpose of Sfiras Omer is to create a linkage between the holiday of freedom and the holiday of commitment to Hashem, as if it were one long holiday, to teach us that without Matan Torah, freedom is worthless. Chazal make the same point when they note that the korban of the Omer on Pesach is a barley offering, which was commonly fed to animals, and the korban of Shavuos is a wheat offering, which was eaten by human beings, because the transition from freedom to responsibility is really the transition from animal liberation to human dignity, and that is why we have the Sfiras Omer, which is a linkage. Now, one question people ask is, if that linkage is so important, why don't you start counting the Omer the first night of Pesach? Well, there are a number of answers that are given, but I want to tell you an answer that the Zohar says. The Zohar says a fascinating analogy. The Zohar says that Shavuos is like a wedding. It is like a chasana between Hashem and the Jewish people. In fact, many of the minhagim of a wedding are derived from Matan Torah, the torches, the kolot, etc. And we know that before a woman can, in fact, Sfardim on Shavuos, many Sfardim, not all, instead of reading Akdamot, which is a poem in Aramaic that we read before the Torah reading, it's minhag of Ashkenazim, Sfardim actually have a ketubah. I don't know if you've ever seen it or heard of it, in which it's written in the same style as a marriage contract, in which Hashem is the Chatan and Bnei Yisrael are the Kala, and all of the obligations and responsibilities between husband and wife are proclaimed. So Shavuos is a wedding. Now the Zohar says if Shavuos is a wedding, then just as a woman must have 7 clean days without menstrual bleeding before she can be with her husband, so we have 7 weeks of preparation. Each week is equal to one of the 7 clean days. Now we know, though, that you don't start the 7 clean days until there's what's called a hefsek Tara. So he says the first day of Pesach, we can't count as a totally clean day because we were still in Mitzrayim at the beginning. We still had the Tumah. So the first day of Pesach is the hefsek Tahara, and then we start counting the 7 clean weeks the day after, and that is what the Zohar says is the concept of Sfirat HaOmer. As I say, that was not my topic for tonight. My topic for tonight might be one of the most technical halachos in all of the Torah, and the Torah gives an extraordinary amount of detail here. And that is the laws of leprosy, the laws of Tzaraat. You know, it's quite amazing. If you were to count the number of psukim that are devoted to Shabbos, to kashrus, to belief in Hashem, you know, the fundamental ideas of Judaism, so you might get, 20 verses, 30 verses for any one of those topics. The amount of psukim devoted to leprosy and all of its many types and all of its many combinations and permutations is like 100 verses. Extremely detailed, very, very difficult. In fact, even people who have learned in yeshiva for many years have difficulty just figuring out what on earth is even going on here, and the like. Now, why the Torah gives such inordinate detail to Tzaraat? By the way, I'm using leprosy, you understand, that is not really, the modern disease that used to be, because it's not even called leprosy, but Hansen's disease, used to be referred to leprosy when you have leprous colonies and all of that, does not correspond to the Torah's description of Tzaras. In fact, the closest thing that corresponds to the Torah's description of Tzaraat is the word psoriasis, which is actually a Greek version of Tzaras, and it clearly was a skin condition. That is how it is described. But as the Rambam points out, and the Rambam, of course, himself was a doctor, it is not primarily a medical condition. It is rather a spiritual punishment that God would put on a person, which would have a physical manifestation. because of various sins and defects of character that are within the person. And
emotional does bring out skin disease.
Yes, okay, that could very well be so, but it is a spiritual message. In fact, the Ramban.
You know you've done this wrong and that wrong.
Yes, the Ramban points out that Tzaras is a mini form of prophecy in which God is giving a person direct feedback as to what they need to correct in their lives. And that is why the Ramban says, interestingly enough, when you no longer have prophecy, you no longer get those direct messages. So even though Tzaras is certainly unpleasant, and Tzaras is a great stigma, and there's humiliation in being separated from people and the like, but actually it is a form of prophetic feedback. And I remember when I taught law school for many years, so in law school, I don't know what they do in Israel, but at least in American law schools, there's only one test at the end of the semester, right? We don't give quizzes or anything in the middle. So students can go through a whole semester and they really don't have a sense of feedback. They often ask, give us feedback. And a person might say to Hashem, give me feedback. How am I doing, God? Am I good? Now, when there was man, there was feedback. That with man, the righteous people had their man right next to their tent, and the people who were less righteous had to look for their man. Now, you might ask me a question. So if I'm next to a tzaddik, why don't I just take his man? It's right there. The answer is, I didn't see it. This is the miracle. In other words, it's not like you looked at the whole desert, it was covered with man. If I was not a righteous person, I didn't see anything. So I'm just walking around, looking around for my man. So that's a report card, meaning if you, you just wouldn't know. You just wouldn't know. It kind of assimilated to the ground, so to speak. So so that was a daily report card. How far did you have to go to get your man? Tzaras is also a report card. What type of defects? Now we know Tzaras comes in different varieties. There's Tzaras of the flesh. There's Tzaras of garments. There's Tzaras of houses, kind of like mold in your basement and the like. And Chazal basically say that Tzaras of the flesh comes because of Lashon Hara, where you speak evilly about people. Metzorah, Motzi Ra, a person who says bad things about others. We know Tzaras of Bigadim comes because of Gasut Haruach, arrogance, excessive pride, because clothing is often an expression of our pride. And finally, the Tzaraat of the Bayit comes from Chemdat HaMamon. That means an over-attachment. Huh? I didn't hear you. Well, it's described in the Torah. Now, Chazal actually say there are no recorded cases of this happening. What is it? It's kind of, you have like a leprosy on the garment itself. And there's a procedure in which you cut it away, and then if it comes back, you got to burn the garment. With a house, there again a procedure, you cut it away, and if it comes back, you destroy the house, literally. The house is literally destroyed. Say again?
But then you find gold in the wall.
Yeah, well, that's actually part of the point. Part of the point was that because you were selfish with your possessions, God makes you expose them to everybody. And then they see how selfish you were, so there's a penance. Now, one point about Tzaras that is very unique, and that is the leper is isolated. He goes chutz l'machaneh. This is very unusual. A normal tamei, like even a tamei from a dead body, is not allowed to enter the Temple Mount, but he can certainly be with people. The Metzorah must be quarantined. Now, although it is tempting to look at this as, a public health concern for communicable diseases, but the Rambam himself explains the only communicable disease we are concerned about is Lashon Hara itself, meaning Tzaraat is not a contagious medical condition, but there is a midah keneged midah here, because a Baal Lashon Hara creates divisiveness, pirud, separation between people. We want him to understand what it's like to be alone. I remember when I was in, they used to call it junior high, now it's called middle school, 7th grade, 6th or 7th grade. So there was a short story that we read, a Man Without a Country. I don't know if you ever read it. So the concept was, this was, some story that goes back to the time of Aaron Burr, this early revolution against the United States government. And one of Burr's collaborators, said he said to the judge that, he thinks this is an unfair court, and he wishes he'll never see the United States again. So his gezerah was that he would be on a ship and he would never hear anything about the United States. The newspapers were cut, etc. And then the message of the story was how much he yearned to be connected. And that's what we tell the person. The power of speech is amazing. Right? Mishlei says, "Hamavet v'hachayim biyad halashon." Death and life are in the hands of the tongue. The Medrash gives a very cute story. You get the story. But all the different limbs of the body were arguing who is more dominant. The arm says, I'm the one that lifts things, and the legs say, I'm the one that, runs, and, etc. So finally the tongue says, nope, I'm better than all of you. So they started mocking the tongue. They said, hey, you don't even have a bone. You can't even stand up. You're lying prone. What type of power, do you have? So the tongue says, I'll tell you. So this body, I guess it's a servant, is in front of the king. And the tongue starts saying abusive things to the king. You're a real jerk, stupid. The king says, off with your head. So now all the limbs are afraid. The limbs are saying to the tongue, get us out of this trouble. You put us in this big trouble. And the tongue apologized, and the king forgave, etc. A nice king to forgive. So he said, you see, I could kill you, and I could give you life. And again, this is a mashal, because death and life has many, many meanings. It's not simply a question of physical survival or physical death. But a person could be killed inside with humiliation, with pain, with the emotional torments of the unkind words that are expressed by people. And on the other side, speech is a vehicle for comfort and for chizuk and for strength. We have the power in our words to give a person hope, to give a person courage. Right? So all of that is death and life are in the hands of the tongue.
Question? If indeed, as the Tzaraat that we read about in our Parsha is a spiritual and not a medical condition, then why does Tanakh use the same word to describe the affliction of General Naaman, who was a Gentile?
No, it is. Let me point out, it certainly is a physical condition. I mean, we're not denying that. It is described as a physical condition. But it is a physical condition that is a punishment from God because of a spiritual affliction.
Are Gentiles subject to it?
Generally not. Naaman was actually an unusual situation. God wanted to show Elisha's power, miracles, etc. So Naaman was afflicted. Typically, it's not used in that way. Now, here is the thing. I want to go over. There are many types of tzaras, as I indicated. There is the basic threefold classification is person, clothing, houses. Within person, there are further subdivisions. There is what you call, no pun intended, the plain vanilla tzaras of the flesh. And then there's special rules of tzaras if it's in a hairy area of the body, like the beard. And then there's another rule when it's on top of the head. And then there's yet another rule when it comes after a burn or after a boil. Different set of rules, right? We have many, many ways this is sliced up. And to go over even the description of this would be much more complicated. We don't have time for this at all. But I want to take plain vanilla tzaras and go through it and show you that even in the most technical, arcane parts of the Torah, there are wonderful spiritual lessons that we learn and we can apply. What happens here? A person has a white splotch on his arm, on his skin. Okay, this does not apply today. He is mechuyav, he or she is mechuyavet, to go to the Kohen. The Kohen is the referee here. What did the referee say? It ain't a strike until I call it a strike, or whatever it is. Tzaras is exactly that way. Tzaras cannot become tzaras, no matter what the condition is, until the Kohen proclaims it as such. So you have an obligation to report to the Kohen, and the Kohen has an obligation to call it in accordance with the halacha, but if he doesn't call it tzarat, it's not tzarat. yet. That is why we have an ad halacha, that there are certain times of year in which, in fact, this is actually the Rambam's proof that this is not a contagious disease, you'll see, because there are certain times of year where the Kohen is not allowed to proclaim it as Tzaras. And that is during a Chag or Chol HaMoed, the Kohen does not proclaim Tzarat, right? The office of Tzaraat is closed, because if a person were to become a Metzorah during the Chag, even Chol HaMoed, that would take away from the joy of the Chag. If a Chatan or a Kala get married, and for some reason there's a Tzarat that develops, during the 7 days of Mishtah, the 7 days of celebration, we don't proclaim Tzaraat. Now, the Rambam argues quite convincingly that if Tzaraat would be an issue of contagious disease, well, what's that sense of that? Because I'm going to allow you to infect other people because we don't want to take away your happy occasion. Obviously, it's not a contagious disease in that way. It's a spiritual punishment, and God says at various times we want to defer the punishment so you can enjoy the honeymoon or the simcha or the chag or the sheva brachos or whatever it is. Okay, but let's assume that no sheva brachos, no chag, the person has a white splotch. So if it's a certain size and a certain color, so step number 1 is he is quarantined for 7 days. At the end of the 7 days, on day 7, the Kohen inspects, what's called the nega. The nega is the Tzaraat, and looks for one of 3 things that might have happened. Either had there been a black hair, let's say in the arm, that turned white. In other words, what starts off the process is the appearance of the nega. That's just a splotch. But then the Kohen has to look for one of 3 simanim of tuma. Siman number 1 is a black hair turned white. Or siman number 2 is the nega grew bigger. So the Kohen has to measure. Siman number 3 is maybe counterintuitive, that sounds like something good, is michya. Michya means in the middle of the nega, there is the appearance of healthy flesh. If either one of those 3 things happens, he is upgraded or downgraded into a definitive Metzorah who can't get out of that condition until he brings sacrifices and everything else. Now let's say on day 7 he still has the nega, but he does not have one of those 3 simanim of tumah. We wait another week. And on day 14, actually it's day 13 because day 7 overlaps. On day 13, we once again, or the Kohen, not we, the Kohen once again looks for one of those 3 simanim, right? The black hair turning white, the nega going bigger, or the appearance of healthy flesh.
Is he quarantined during this time?
Yes, he is. If he has on day 13, because day 7 is both the end of the first period and the beginning of the second period, then once again he is upgraded or downgraded into a definitive Metzorah who will not leave that status until he brings sacrifices. But what if on day 13 he still has the Tzaras? He has the Tzaras. He mamash has the Tzaras. But he doesn't have one of the 3 simanei tumah. He goes home and he's fine. He doesn't need sacrifices. There is no ritual that he needs at all, even though the Tzaraat actually didn't disappear. It's still there. Now, the technical term for this is that the 2 weeks, the 13 days of quarantine, no quarantine, he is called a muskar. Muskar comes from sagar. He's closed off. But he's not yet muchlat. Right? The hechlet is when he's a definitive. Right? So in order to graduate from a muskar to a muchlat, you have to have one of the 3 simanim of tumah, and we only check twice. Meaning we really don't care if, for example, the nega grew bigger in the middle of the 7 days, but we didn't see the growth. We only check day 7 and day 13. We ignore interim fluctuations, if there would be any. But the only way you become a muchlat is with one of the simanei tumah, so I'm using the vocabulary here, on either day 7 or day 13. Without the simanei tumah, the maximum quarantine is 13 days, And upon the expiration of that period, if there's no siman tuma, he goes home, even though he still has the negat tzaraat. We don't know how long that's
I
going
was
to
about
remain.
to say that could be a very long time.
That might be the rest of his life. It might be another week, whatever it would be. But at that point, we do not apply the halachot of
So even-
there is no longer a quarantine. He no longer contaminates that which he touches, etc. Yeah.
Now, if, for example, he has it, 3 months later, some of these simanim appear, it doesn't matter.
Oh no, it certainly does matter. Yeah. In a way, it's a time bomb in a sense, because even though we let him go, I'm glad you brought it up. Even though we let him go on day 13, if there's no siman tuma, if that Tzaras does not go away, if at any time it grows bigger, or the Seyar turns Lavan, or there's Michya, he's immediately a full Mitzvah. He's very technical. If the Tzaras disappeared, and then he gets it again, we start the process over again.
Clearly.
In other words, the 2 weeks.
Sure.
But if the Tzaras didn't go away, if you get any of the siman tuma, even 10 years later, although it's not likely he would stay that long, he's a muchlad immediately. You skip the...
How would we know? Would he be obligated?
Yeah, so there's an obligation. Now again, you're correct. It would be relatively easy for a guy to always cover this up.
When did the sun stop?
Huh?
When was this?
It's basically the base of English. This is a form of prophecy. So when the temple was destroyed, he has a duty to report. And you're correct. There might be all sorts of Metzorahs out there who didn't fulfill
Wearing longs.
their
But somebody
reporting
else,
obligation.
if you didn't see it, you didn't notice it, if it's a part of your arm that you weren't,
Yes.
no mirrors. So if another family member saw it, it's their duty to report it?
Yes,
or
it
what?
would have to be reported. Again, now, I don't have the statistics, how many people reported it. I don't have statistics at all, how many people were Metzorah. But this is the theoretical structure. So the 3 terms you need to know is muskar, muchlatz, and simanei tuma. And to give you a little bit more vocabulary, the 3 simanem of tuma are seyar, hafach lavan, the hair turns white. The expansion, the Torah uses the word pasa hanega. Pasa, pei, sin hey. In the Mishnah, it's called pisayon or pisyon, with the sama, but the same word. Pisyon is the rabbinic term for pasa hanega. And the healthy flesh is called in the Torah michyat basar chai, michyat, living flesh, good flesh. With the chet, yeah, michyat basar chai. Yeah. Well, michyat is the word. Memchet yod. Michyat comes from chaya, living flesh, healthy flesh. So this, yeah.
So the person who had all these signs, or one of the
Any
signs,
one of them.
gives the carbon and goes home.
No. 2 things. No. Once he has these signs, he remains a Metzorah until it goes away, and when it goes away, he brings a carbon. He does not go home till it goes away at that point. At that point, he is stuck. So he could be a Metzorah for a long time. Again, typically it didn't have to be that long, but whatever it took. So, obviously, we're dealing with hyper-technical laws. And as I say, it's not only the Chumash that gives extraordinary detail. I once saw an interesting explanation from Rabbi Sal Berman. Some of you might know the rabbi of... He had been the rabbi of Lincoln Square, and now I don't know what he's got. Maybe he's just a law professor right now. But he gave an interesting point. It's kind of a legal perspective. I kind of identify it as well. And that is, he said like this. He says that the reason the Torah goes into so much detail is precisely because the Torah wants there to be transparency when it gives such a power to another person over your life. The Kohen is given extraordinary power. Right? The Kohen can determine on a Metzorah, whatever it is, that can really affect my life in a very, very deep way. But the Torah doesn't want that to be a black box. The Torah doesn't want authority figures to have power over you unless you know exactly step by step what they're going to be doing to you. Meaning, it's not like a secretive process. Oh, if the Kohen looks at you and thinks you're a... In other words, if the Torah wouldn't give you the detail, then there would be no check on abuses of power. The Torah would simply say, if a Kohen thinks you're a Metzorah, you're a Metzorah, without spelling out in excruciating detail what the standards are, there is a great potential for abuse of power. And therefore, in order to limit abuse, the Torah opts for a transparency of exactly what the Kohen must do. So if a Kohen is abusing his power, we or the Chachamim or whoever would be able to determine that. Again, that's an interesting, I don't want to get too political. That is an interesting analogy in the way Psak Halacha sometimes is done today. You know, Psak Halacha, in an ideal sense, should also be a relatively transparent process. A posek should give the reasons and the sources and the arguments so we have a sense of what's going on. What often happens today is they tend to be, to use another religion analogy, ex cathedra pronouncements, in which we simply see a wall poster. Usually it doesn't even say who the rabbi is. It just says, the great rabbis have declared that the internet is forbidden, or that you're not allowed to go to therapy. I've seen that as well.
Therapy is forbidden.
Yeah,
What are
therapy.
the rabbis?
Doesn't say who the rabbis are. It doesn't even say. Huh?
Go to the rabbi instead of the
Well, yeah, something like that, yeah. So this is kind of the opposite of kind of explaining what the basis of Psak Halacha is. Now, again,
It's not halachic. It's not
Huh?
halachic then.
well, it may not be halachic at all. But again, I mean, I understand the issue. I mean, some have argued. Again, this is an interesting issue that sometimes if a rabbi tries to explain, that may cause misunderstanding. Meaning, sometimes people will just listen, just do it. Don't ask why. Okay, one could discuss this. I mean, I know in myself, I've sometimes encountered that in trying to explain something, perhaps that sometimes, maybe even tonight, that may create more confusion than clarification.
Doesn't this imply that doesn't the comparison also suggest there should be a process of appeal? Suppose I see him saying, look, this Cohen wasn't wearing his glasses, he's too old. I want another Cohen. Is there an option?
You can do it with
Well, there's not an option of going to another Kohen, but it would appear that the Kohen's judgment, because remember, the Kohen might not even be a learned person, right? The Kohen's judgment is subject to halachic review by the Sanhedrin and the like to determine whether he was following the proper standards. So technically, the Sanhedrin cannot proclaim a person to be a Metzorah or not a Metzorah, but they can supervise the propriety of the decision-making of the Kohen. Yeah. Okay. So,
As a puzzled and challenged Cohen in these later days before Mashiach,
yeah,
upon us been
you better learn all this stuff.
some of these, this whole system seems so primitive for modern thinking and almost at risk for false accusation, which is a major violation because the connection, there are skin problems that are not connected to spiritual problems that could be dietary I just wonder if people were falsely accused of being something they weren't. Like the law seems too strict. Clearly if we have an understanding now of skin conditions, that this system seems to lack compassion.
That really is a very, very excellent question, and that is. No, the question becomes this. The question becomes.
Now it's like everybody has so much of their own guide or whatever. Like the coincidence.
So you're saying we have the spiritual problem? The question becomes. I mean, that is a very good question. I don't have a complete answer to this. And that is there some room in the halachic structure to weed out physical problems from spiritual problems? Meaning to say, would the laws of Tzaras kick in only if it be determined there is not an underlying, medical condition, and it just comes from the heavens, so to speak. I have to admit, if you read the halachos literally, there does not seem to be a weeding out process for that. But that would be a very, very interesting question. I want to think about it some more.
But except, there are, for the very reason that there are these three simanim,
Yeah.
It would seem that if it were something totally different,
Yeah, it could be the siman, maybe
the
the simanim make
simanim are
the
the
difference.
weeder out.
Yeah, that may be.
Well, one of those simanim would seem could
Growth,
easily
yeah.
occur in a medical condition.
Yeah, the expansion.
The expansion.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
you're right,
expansion,
You're right,
for
you're
sure.
right, you're right, you're right.
For sure.
It's a good question. But let me just share with you the general thought that I want to convey. That is, I want to convey this idea of the three simanim of Tuma and the fact that if they don't exist, he goes home, even with the Tzaras, and that is the following. The ultimate spiritual message of the Metzorah is we put him in isolation, so he should contemplate the damage that he's perpetuated through Lashon Hara, and it should be a time of tshuva and reflection. The simanim of Tuma is essentially God telling the person, you have not really gone through the process properly. And that is the following. When a person is confronted with his sin, right, whatever it is in life, when we finally are confronted with different things we did wrong, the pain that we caused, the people that we hurt, the damage that we've done, we look for all sorts of rationalizations, all sorts of escape routes, all sorts of evasions of responsibility. And the Simanei Tumah, allegorically or metaphorically, may represent the range of rationalizations and excuses that a person experiences, which is why God says you got to go back into quarantine and rethink. The first thing we might do is something called denial. We might refuse to accept we did anything wrong. The guy deserved it. The guy was rotten. The guy didn't behave. Nobody likes him anyway. That might refer to whitewashing the evil of my behavior, denial. The white hair, the black hair turning white, right? In common speech, we say, when a person denies wrongdoing, they're engaging in a whitewashing process. So if the Seir Lavan appear, right, the nega is the warning to the person, look at your life and try to correct it. The Seir Lavan is saying, well, you've been in quarantine 7 days or 13 days. The hair is white. You have not yet accepted responsibility for your actions. You are in a state of denial. Go back and reflect. That might be the allegorical meaning of the Seir Lavan. Acknowledge and take responsibility. Now, the second response might actually come from the other way around. That is, sometimes a person has such an excessive guilt and such a strong sense of their inadequacies and failures that they feel that any positive change is hopeless and impossible. This is a term we use, yiyush. Yiyush is to give up hope. Right? The person is overly consumed with their failures, their inadequacies. They say, I have reached the point of no return.
Despair.
Despair. That is pisayan, the expansion of the nega, where the person says, what's the use? I've sinned, I might as well continue. There's no way I can correct it. It's the opposite of denial, but it comes from a hyper sense of guilt, inadequacy, and despair. You know, with Adam HaRishon, we find a very interesting thing. When Adam HaRishon eats from the Asadas, so Hashem says, right, so Adam and Chava are hiding because they're naked, and Hashem says, Hashem of course knows the answer. Hashem says, who told you that you're naked, guys? There's nothing wrong with being naked. Why are you ashamed? Did you perhaps eat from the fruit that I told you not to eat from? Is that what's going on? So Adam says, remarkable chutzpah, he says, yeah, the woman that you gave me the fruit. I mean, note, he's evading responsibility twice. He's saying, it's the woman's fault, and you gave me that woman, so don't blame me. But there's a third defiance that the Medrash reads. V'yochel, which we translate as I ate, can also be a lashon asid, I will eat. And then according to the Midrash, Adam is saying to Hashem, Ochalti, I ate. V'yochelot, I'll do it again. Now that's kind of an astounding statement. I did it, and I'll do it again. I would do it again. What is that? Adam is telling Hashem that. So some suggest it's a much more poignant statement. he's not saying it to God to find him. He's saying to God, I messed up. I'm such a failure. I did it, and I know it's going to happen again. I don't know what to do. I'm trapped. That's pisayon. The person's attitude is, what's the use? I might as well continue. I've gone beyond the point of no return. That's pisayon. So again, the message is, you have not done the proper reflection. Go back and think about that. In other words, the siman tuma essentially is the message to the person that he's not yet begun the process as he needs to begin it, and that's why he's coming. Now, there's a third response a person has, which you might call emotional distancing, meaning he knows he's not a hypocrite, meaning he realized he did something wrong, but he just doesn't want to think about it. Now, maybe he doesn't want to think about it because if he thinks about it, he'll become category number 2 and live in despair. But he creates what you might call an emotional distancing between himself and the problem. I just don't want it to penetrate my conscious waking hours. I don't want to think. I want to repress things. Of course, as Freud said, that is the cause of all sorts of neuroses and psychoses and the like. But repression is the common. We talk about sweeping the dust under the rug. That's a video where, like, there was a pile of, the rug was 30 feet above the floor, sweeping the dust under the light. But this is not. See, this is different than the whitewashing. The whitewashing is when I lie to myself and I convince myself that my behavior was justified. The third standard is when I simply don't allow myself to dwell on it, and that's represented by the mihyah. You're surrounded by rocks all over you, but you don't let it penetrate your inner core, as it were. So the 3 simanei tuma represent the 3 forms of denial and equivocation that we go through in order not to accept responsibility. And the reason why they make us tameh is because the whole purpose of the quarantine is to engage in this type of reflection. And this is God's report card. You have completed. Now, Masha'enke, if after the 2 weeks, or the 13 days, there are not the simanei tuma, so one of 2 things are possible. Perhaps, as you suggested, that indicates this is just a medical problem. Or perhaps, even if it was a spiritual issue, but Hashem is saying, you've worked on yourself enough that you could go home and continue your reflections. You don't have to be in this protective and confining environment. Now, what's interesting is, we just finished Chag HaPesach, where we just finished Holiday of Pesach. We know, of course, that the great prohibition of Pesach is not to have chametz, right? Only matzah and not chametz. So if you think about it, we know that chametz is a remez to the Yetzer Hara. But if you think about it, these 3 forms of denial actually correspond to different aspects of chametz as well. Right. One aspect of chametz is well known, probably the best well-known aspect, is chametz is puffed up. Chametz represents arrogance and gaiva. And arrogance and gaiva comes along with denial. Because if I give excuses for my behavior, in other words, if I whitewash, if I, in a sense, defend the bad things that I did by defining them as good, that is generally characteristic of an arrogant person who refuses to acknowledge with humility that they have made mistakes. Now, another aspect of chametz, Maral writes, chametz and matzah, chametz spoils, and matzah does not really spoil. Chametz rots, it can form mold and other things. Matzah is something that does not spoil. Now, sometimes it gets a little stale, etc., but by and large, matzah does not spoil. That refers to the sense of despair, when a person just continues their rot. So chametz can also represent the idea of feeling that because I failed, I will just continue to fail for the rest of my life. And finally, the Maral makes a third point, that chametz corresponds to inertia. What do we mean by this? We talked about this before Pesach. that if flour and water come together, you don't have to do anything to make it chametz. You don't need yeast. You don't need a starter. If water hits the flour halachically, if 18 minutes passes without people working the dough, halachically it is chametz. Now you might not even notice that. It may not look, you don't see a noticeable rise necessarily, but halachically, the contact of water and flour for 18 minutes, if the dough was not being worked upon, it is chametz. So you don't make chametz. Chametz is what happens by itself. That is inertia. Matzah requires the action of arresting the fermentation by baking. Right? Once you bake it, that destroys the fermentation. Right? Something baked cannot become chametz. The chumrah of Hasidim, that they don't eat shiruya, they call it in Yiddish gebrux, is not a halachic requirement, because obviously once matzah is baked, it can be in liquid, you can make matzah balls, it doesn't become chametz. But the chumrah was created really by the Baal Tanya, the first Chabad Rebbe, that it spread among many Hasidic groups. That's simply because of a chashash that maybe some of the matzah was not completely baked, and therefore it could still become chametz by contact with liquid. From Chabad, it spread to other Hasidim, and from other Hasidim, it spread to the hotel industry in Israel, because they want to maximize business, so virtually every hotel with a hashgacha will not serve shiruya. Although I was at a place we actually did have matzah balls, but they were potato starters. Matzah balls, they were not matzah balls, matzah balls. So it's amazing how versatile the lowly potato can in fact be. Of course, Ashkenazim are very lucky. There was a discussion around 300 years ago whether potatoes should be banned as kitniyot. So there actually was a consideration that you wouldn't be able to have potatoes on Pesach, but eventually the Chachamim decided that would have been possible for Klal Yisrael to survive without potatoes on Pesach. But it makes a lot of sense, actually, if you think about it. I mean, if Kitniyot was based on the idea that these things were ground into flour, like lentils,
It's curious.
rice, then potato flour, you could do everything you do with rice flour. So it should have been Kitniyot, but still, they didn't want to establish. In fact, that gets into an interesting digression, because here's the problem. Potatoes are indigenous to the Americans. I don't know, potatoes were not native European. So in the time of the Gaonim, when the laws of when the minhag of Kitniyot was formulated, there was no potatoes. So that's a general issue. Did the Gaonim establish a principle, meaning things that are ground up into flour, and therefore as new things get discovered, we assimilate them into the prohibitions? Or did the Gaonim only prohibit very specific things? Now, the halacha here is very inconsistent, because, okay, rice they had, got you. They didn't have corn. So corn is also Native American. So if you're going to tell me that only the stuff that the Gaonim had is nichlal and kitniyot, and not the stuff that comes later, then logically corn should be okay. Peanuts should be okay. Some actually say peanuts are okay. Quinoa would certainly be okay. And what? Say what?
Soybeans.
Even soybeans. You're correct. Elamai, that which we're machmer is because the Gaonim established a principle. But if they established a principle, that should apply to potatoes as well. So there's a lot of inconsistency in this. And even something like quinoa, that's the Quinoa, quinoa, a lot of machlokim. The Star K and many American hashgachos. Yeah, they go back and forth. But many American hashgachos approve in Eretz Yisrael, as is its wont. Many hashgachos here do not approve, right? So quinoa goes back and forth, right? So if you're Sephardic, you don't have any problems. So it's later. And then people argue, now that we're in Eretz Yisrael and we're back there, maybe we should go back to the minhagim of Eretz Yisrael. Kitniyos was a minhag of the Gaonim of Babel. It was not a minhag in Eretz Yisrael. Okay, I don't want to get into that.
The flour and the water as well?
Say again?
So back to the flour and the water. What was that one? That was the impression?
Which one?
Is there a connection reaction?
Yeah. I was saying, So I was saying is this. I was saying that if it represents inertia, that is not letting yourself go to the place where you need to go. That's kind of the matter. So therefore, it's interesting that the three symbolic meanings of chametz correspond to the three simanim of tuma of the Metzorah. Again, symbol number one, the arrogance of chametz, that it's puffed up and it rises. That corresponds to whitewashing and denial when I justify my behaviors as being righteous and holy. Step number two, the rotting of chametz, the spoilage of chametz, that represents the despair of continuing in my wrath because I think there's no way I could be metaken. And number three, the michya, the healthy flesh, which represents emotional distancing and not thinking about it. That corresponds to the inertia of chametz, in which you don't move to go where you need to go because that's going to be too painful for you. So the three associations of chametz do correspond to the three simanei tuma of the Metzorah, right? So again, it's an interesting point. Again, it's useful to once, as I said before, to realize.
You said when you that last one that you
Yes.
did go home. You said when the last siman.
No, he does not go home. No. Let me explain. If the whole nega goes away, he
This
goes
is just
home.
like a little
But here we're talking about the following. He has a white splotch.
Yeah.
And in the middle of the white splotch, there's the appearance of a healthy flesh, but it's still surrounded by the white splotch. There, that's a simon tuma.
Okay.
That's called a michya. Right? If the whole nega goes away, that's a separate thing. He's no longer going to be a leper, even if he had simon tuma. That's how he gets better. He brings his korbanos, and actually he counts 7 days and brings korbanos, and then he's okay.
We didn't hear what happens if he has the simanei, they don't go away. Does he remain a Metzorah his whole life?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Once he has the nega and the simanim, one of the simanim, he is a Metzorah until they go away. When they go away, he then counts 7 days and brings korbanos. Until they go away, he is a muchlat, and there's no automatic termination to that status other than the simanim going away or the nega going away.
So the three lepers who went out and discovered the empty camp of the Assyrians were, we assume in that category, that they were long-term.
Well, we don't know
lepers.
how long, but yeah, at that point they were muchlatim. Yeah. Now, of course, we do know, if you remember, there was one recorded instance of one of the kings of Israel who became a leper. This is Uziyahu. And that's very, very interesting that it is said that Uziyahu wanted to take the prerogative of being a Kohen. He wasn't a Kohen, but he figured I'm a king, so why can't there be a Kohen too? So he entered the Kodesh HaKodashim, which only the Kohen Gadol enters, only on Yom Kippur. And immediately, there was a bright flash of Tzaras on his forehead. And because this is the arrogance of thinking he could take on this particular role. And that was, in fact, Rashi says, in many ways we consider a Metzorah to be similar to a dead person. So if you remember, Yeshayahu Hanavi, Isaiah's great inauguration to be a prophet, when he sees Hashem sitting, Kavyochel, on the throne of glory, and the Malachim say, the Kedusha is based on this, they say, Kadosh, 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 Hashem Tzavakos, Malo, Kol Haaretz Kavodo. This is taken from Yeshayahu's inaugural prophecy. So it mentions that this prophecy came to him in the year of the death of the king of Uziyahu, And Rashi explains chronologically, Uziyahu did not die, but that was the year that he became a leper, and his son took over the Malchut. Yeah.
In the temple, you had the Ezer and Nashim, and they said there were 4 borders there.
Yes.
One was for the Nazir, one was for the Metzorah.
Yes.
What was it there for the Metzorah?
Yeah. This is an interesting point. This refers. Yeah, you're correct. This refers to the problem. Okay, there's a certain paradox in the laws of Metzorah. Let me explain this. This is referring to a Metzorah who the Tzaras has gone away. He counted 7 days, and he's bringing his korbanot. Now, let me explain what the problem is. There's a certain problem here. A Metzorah is not allowed to enter the temple until he brings his korbanot. But part of how he brings his korbanot is that the Kohen has to apply blood to his thumbs and his ears. So you have a classical catch-22. He's not allowed to be in the Beit HaMikdash until he brings his korban, but in the bringing of the korban, he has to be in the Beit HaMikdash. He can't do it long distance because the Kohen applies the blood of the korban to the Metzorah. So the answer basically is, he stands outside the gate of the Beit HaMikdash and he puts his hands in. And the Kohen is applying the blood, right? Imagine you have the gate of the Beit HaMikdash, the Metzorah is standing on the outside, but his hands are on the inside, and the Gemara discusses, is partial entry permitted, etc. So that chamber is to enable that to happen. Yeah, but that's not referring to someone that actively has Tzaras. Someone that actively has Tzaras has no connection to the Beit HaMikdash at all.
The Tzaras spreads to the whole body.
Yes, that's very interesting. That is an interesting anomaly, and that is if the whole body has Tzaraat, that's 100%. If every single part is Tzaras, so even though you would think that should be the worst Tzaras of all, paradoxically he's Tahor. If a little bit, if there's 1/4 inch that's not Tzaras, then he's Tameh. If it's 100%. Again, it's hard to understand the reason. I can't explain every single thing. It could very well be that at that point, he can no longer live in denial, meaning it's impossible. When Hashem says 100%, he understands. At that point, you've gotten his attention, as it were. So he doesn't need the whole process. But you are correct. It's similar, but it's not the same reason. It's similar to another anomaly in halacha. You may recall by a capital crime. Capital crimes have to be adjudicated by a Sanhedrin of 23 judges. It's a big court, 23 judges. So if 22 of them say he's chayav, and one says he's exempt, so he gets the death penalty. You need a majority of 2, actually. A majority of 1 is not sufficient. So if it's 12 to 11, actually the truth is you can never get a majority of 2, but if it's 12 to 11 for conviction, he does not get killed, because you need a majority of 2. But that would be 13 to 10. So it'll be a majority of 3 practically. Okay. But the paradox is, what if you have a unanimous verdict for conviction? What if you have 23 judges say he deserves to die? 23! So he goes free. He goes free. Because if not a single person could see any type of exonerating circumstance, we have to suspect the process was not pure, because in an unbiased process, somebody will see something. Now, this creates a very fascinating ethical dilemma. Here's the ethical dilemma. I'm sitting with my colleagues on the Sanhedrin. We're 23 judges. And I'm the last guy. I'm the youngest judge, right? So my vote is last. So I believe the guy's guilty. And so do 22 of my colleagues. So I'm hearing guilty, 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 guilty. I'm Mr. 23. Now here's the paradox. If I say guilty, he goes free. If I say innocent, he gets executed. So, what should I say? Should I lie in order that the truthful verdict, as I see it, will be carried out? Or should I tell the truth if that will result in what I believe the truthful verdict will not be carried out? So the Gemara says in Masechet Shavuos, Beferish, you are not allowed to lie, meaning, Midvar Sheker Tirchak, you must distance yourself from a lie. So even if, as a result of your telling the truth, what's going to happen is something you think is not truthful, but God's halacha is that the guy goes free. So in effect, Hashem is obviously considering that to be the correct result. So actually, you're not allowed to lie under those circumstances.
But if you lie, it says that you don't
well, that may be a good argument why you don't lie. Yeah.
Can I make two possible solutions to this problem? So you're not going to lie, you guys are going to go for it. So you have to believe that Hashem's going to take care of it. You're still
Yes.
Or there's the pit. You can always throw him into the pit. The guy's a serial killer. You can't let him loose.
Well, if he said, yeah, okay. I mean, that would work. Yeah.
What the pit is.
Yeah. Yeah. There are other rules. Again, I mean, as you know.
When there is a Sanhedrin, there is a pit. Is that what you're saying?
Well, the basic problem is that, forgetting about this particular case of the unanimous verdict, that's just a particular problem. The overall problem is that the Sanhedrin procedure to impose capital punishment is an extremely difficult standard to ever meet, because you have to have eyewitnesses, not circumstantial evidence. The witnesses have to be two men, they have to be Jews, they can't be related to each other or to the victims. They have to be Shomer Shabbos people. And they have to give the murderer warning before he murders, don't do it. And the murderer has to acknowledge the warning, I'm going to do it anyway. And only then the witnesses are cross-examined separately on very minute details, like what color were his socks. And if the witness says, I don't know, we throw out the testimony. Meaning, we create a system where it's almost impossible to execute anybody. As the Gemara says, Mishnah says in Makos, a Sanhedrin that killed somebody, unlike the state of Arkansas, that apparently loves to kill multiple people in the same day. Yeah, they did 2. They wanted to do 8, but they only did 2. But it says a Sanhedrin that killed once every 7 years was called a bloody Sanhedrin, and according to another opinion, 70 years. And Rabbi Akiva, who was after the Sanhedrin, made the point, if you would be in the Sanhedrin, nobody would get killed. So on one hand, the Torah gives you this capital punishment for many, many sins. On the other hand, Chazal's understanding of the procedure makes it almost impossible, so you're never going to do it. But then you have a problem that if there's not going to be this type of punishment, then murderers are not going to be deterred. Right? This debate about capital punishment, there's no deterrence for murderers and the like. So because of this, what's very, very interesting is that Chazal envisions an alternative system, meaning there's the normal judicial system in which almost nobody's ever going to get executed. But when there's rampant lawlessness, this system may be suspended. You only need one witness, circumstantial evidence, and there are also rules for serial violators, serial murderers or the like. Either they could be executed or they could be indirectly killed. The expression would be they'd be thrown into a pit, they would be given barley and water, which kind of causes them to explode, or whatever their stomach would break, or whatever it would be. Different. In other words, the point basically is that side by side with the legal system is a system a little akin to martial law or extraordinary circumstances of lawlessness. Extrajudicial. It was done by a court, but it was a bit of an extrajudicial procedure. But as I say, in terms of the unanimous verdict, once again, the judge is not supposed to lie. It is intrinsic in the judicial process, as one would expect, that one must be honest and conscientious in executing their duties, even if the net result will be something that you think is not the proper result. Okay. All right.
What happens under normal conditions, where you have a serial murderer with 20 victims, and for each murder there was only one witness, but 20 different witnesses?
Yeah, it's amazing. They got to see the same thing. That's the problem. They have to see the same thing. Even if one witness... Now, there is an argument by money. Interesting machlokas. Let's say one witness saw Ruvain borrow $100 from Shimon on Monday, and one witness saw Ruvain borrow $100 from Shimon on Tuesday. Now, had there been 2 witnesses each day, Ruvain would owe $200. But there's only one witness. But since there's one witness on Monday's transaction and one witness on Tuesday's transaction, we do have 2 witnesses that he owes $100. So in money matters, there is a machloket. Would that be sufficient to allow them to combine? But for capital crimes, that would not be enough. They would have to see the same thing. They would have to see the same thing. But I want to point out the other point Rabbi Post made is also very, very important, and that is, in a system that is predicated on Hashem, in a sense, when bad guys escape, it really isn't so bad. Meaning in the sense that they may escape earthly, human justice, but they will never escape divine justice. And therefore, in effect, there is no such thing as the bad guy getting away. Maybe we're not going to catch him, but if we don't catch him, there'll be other things that will happen. I mean, take an example, O.J. Simpson. Right? O.J. Simpson got away with murder. Right, quite literally. He got away with murder. That's fine. So then he gets thrown into prison for years and years for some crazy little thing about robbing a trophy, whatever he did. It's kind of sad, a person thinks you get away with murder, and then you get trapped over the smallest little stupid thing that winds up to turn into a. So really, Hashem has his ways in many different ofanim. Yeah.
With regard to Metzorah, that is really a brachot with a shining and very gold in the house.
Right.
And
yeah.
When you had to destroy the house, you found your gold.
Yes, according to the Medrash, that was the case. Yeah. But it could be, Hashem kind of, because Tzaraat Habayit is also a public humiliation.
Right.
So that's a kapara, so Hashem gives you a word. But again, Chazal actually say that Tzaraat Habayis and Tzaraat Begadim were theoretical. They actually never happened. So it's hard to reconcile the midrashim. According to, there must be different midrashim. It's very difficult to reconcile all of these. There are teachings that say there was no such thing. Others say this is how the Jews discovered all of the different gold and the like. Okay, you all be well. So, Mr. Shem, yeah.
Can I get
one more? I think there was one more question.
On the compassion and modernity from a compassionate Kohen.
Yeah.
The skin is like the third kidney. What skin diseases now, it's a sign that they should eat more of a pure diet with fruits and vegetables, more water, and less because we're surrounded by synthetic and things that is not really food. So,
all right.
It's a sign, it's a compassionate sign from God, that a warning sign that we need to improve our
maybe warning sign that way. Okay.